Hello there, YouTube. Devin here again. Good morning to you all. I, as you could probably tell by the title of the video, have a really interesting helmet to talk to you about with a lot of really weird history and a lot of really poor decision making when it came to selecting such a helmet. We're going to be talking about the Iraqi M80 series of helmets. Now, I happen to have a mint condition, basically unissued, version of the last Corlan helmet. Now these helmets, I'll go into explaining what Corlan is and where all of these came from and the history about why Iraq has them and why they had so many of them. Because on paper it seemed like a sound design, but in theory, with everything that they went through, not just in general, but everything that they had to go through, probably wasn't the best decision. So, Corlan, for those of you who don't know, is compressed canvas and resin. It's basically canvas and plastic, layered together to make a helmet. Now, this helmet is obviously very heavily inspired on the American M1 helmet, and that would be true because the very first M80 was developed by South Korea, and that's actually where all of the original M80s came from, was from South Korea. So if you have an M80 helmet, like if you're a veteran from the Iraq campaign of the Global War on Terror, and you have one that's green, that is an original M80. It is not the rarest version though, and not the most collectible. So, but the reason for this helmet to exist is because back in the day, so there was a contest, kind of a little war in the 80s between Iraq and Iran called the Iran-Iraq War. Ironically, historians are very well known for having creative names for stuff like that. And Iraq at the time was using a very large combination of Soviet steel helmets. SSH-40s, SSH-60s, Polish WZ-50 helmets, stuff of that sort. They had a bunch of steel helmets. Now, the steel helmets provided adequate protection of the time. Now, this is in the early 80s, of course. And it's a really interesting read about this war if you haven't had a chance to read about it. It's about, basically, it's like trench warfare in the Middle East, but in the 80s with modern weaponry. It's really interesting. And then we ended up having, they ended up having to, many issues, obviously, having to fight this war with Iran. They lost a lot of steel helmets. They realized there was a lot of problems with the steel helmets. For one, in the desert, steel helmets are bad because they get really hot, to the point where they will burn your soldiers. If you've ever been in Iraq in the summer, in the desert, you very well quickly know that there is this thing called heat there, and it gets incredibly hot. Some very warm, almost record-breaking temperatures are recorded there annually. And a steel helmet gets so hot to the point that it hurts the soldiers. It will heat fatigue the soldiers. So the Iraqis, desperately needing to replace helmets they lost in the war and desperately needing to come up with something that isn't a steel helmet, in the early 80s, which is again on the cusp of Kevlar, but nobody really quite knows about it at this time other than the few countries experimenting with their stuff, the ballistic nylon stuff and the Kevlar stuff. They turned to South Korea. South Korea has a solution. They have these. They have M80 helmets made out of Corlan. So in the early 80s, Iraq buys a ton of them from South Korea for cheap, because South Korea kind of realizes they're garbage. They're not really good for protecting your head. This has about the same ballistic rating as a modern day plastic construction helmet. They're not that great at protecting your head. But in the desert, they don't absorb heat as much. They're a lot lighter on your head. You don't get heat fatigued as much. You don't get regular fatigued as much because they don't weigh as much. They're a lot more comfortable to wear for extended periods of time, and for Saddam Hussein's troops and everything like that, it's more about keeping up the image, looking intimidating and stuff like that. That's why a lot of the helmets and a lot of the gear he had looked the way it did. It was to have this image about it. So he would buy a lot of M80 helmets from South Korea, so much so that it is the second most common helmet used out there by the Iraqi troops during the Desert Storm era and into the war in Iraq era. It would be used for quite a long time, basically until around the mid-2000s, where it would start to get replaced by Kevlar options, given as aid by other countries. So, it in the 90s, the Iraqis would start to, again, run out of money, and develop in 1990, actually, a simplified version of the M80 helmet. It would now be in this tan color, prone to delaminating. Their layers, they would come with this big, like, surgical tubing rubber rim on the M90, as it would be known, because if you would bump the helmet on stuff, it would break, essentially, over time. It would start to delaminate the layers, and it would fray, and it would get sharp and everything like that, and they didn't like that. Obviously, they wanted their helmets to serve for a long time, and so they would put this big surgical rubber rim on it. It also had a ton more rivets than this. You'd see a whole second layer of rivets up here, like on the back of the helmet to help hold the liner in and stuff like that, but that's kind of a thing about all of these helmets, is they all have a lot of rivets in them like this to hold the liner and chin strap in, which is very reminiscent of like a Vietnam era M1. The early ones would have, the M80s would have kind of like an OD green type cotton webbing liner. The M90s would have a tan cotton webbing liner, and then the M8003, which is this one, would have this kind of seafoam teal green type liner. These helmets were actually pretty well liked by the troops who weren't at the time fighting, because they were light, they looked authoritative, and all they really had to do is protect your head from bumps. But ballistically, and as far as like protection goes, they were really, really, really poor. But in a non-combat zone, they worked incredibly well, as they were designed to do. They looked authoritative, being a helmet and all that. They were comfortable for the soldiers, and they protected your head from the everyday kind of bumps and bangs that you would encounter. As wars and interventions would go on in Iraq, they quickly realized that these helmets are terrible. And in 2003, they came out with this design now, after realizing that the M80s are starting to get old and wear out, and the M90s are garbage. They would basically go back to the M80 design. They would get machinery from South Korea for now cheap, because South Korea isn't using the M80 anymore, and start making the M80 to almost the same quality standard as the original M80s in Iraq. And they would be tan like the M90, and they would have this, like I said, kind of teal green cotton liner in them. They would be much nicer to everyone's credit, and they would be used into the 2000 teens before they would be fully phased out by the Iraqi army. A lot of these would be picked up as souvenirs. They were never really imported into the United States. So everyone that you find here in North America, or basically around the world, was picked up as a souvenir by somebody. So they are kind of rare, and they are getting kind of expensive. The M8003 is kind of the Rolls Royce of all the models, because it is an actual Iraqi-made version, and it's not going to fall apart on you really all that easy. I still keep a rubber rim on mine just in case for storage, because if I'm sliding it around or something, I just don't want to chip the edges. I'm not worried about it delaminating like the M90s will, but I just don't want the edges to get kind of chipped, because after all, this helmet is still basically plastic. So they would use these for quite a long time. You can see lots of pictures with them and everything like that. The Iraqi soldiers, the Republican Guard, everybody using these. This is probably a better design than the Darth Vader helmet, which is another Corlan design. But that was just designed to look intimidating, but it's basically the same material as this. So that covers the general history of this helmet and everything like that, what it's made out of, what it'll protect against, which is basically nothing other than bumping your head, and all that other good stuff. So we're going to flip the camera around now. We're going to show you a liner compared to an American M1, and then we'll flip it back around here, and I'll put the camouflage cover and everything that it would have on it, and I'll show you how it fits, feels, all that other good stuff, and how it would work while you're going prone, and everything else as far as how it would look actually in the field being seen on an Iraqi soldier. So stay tuned for that. Alrighty, so here we are. You can see that the Iraqi M8003 is on the right, and American Vietnam era M1 is on the left. Now you could just immediately comparing, you could see a little bit of a size difference. The M80 is a little bit smaller, a little bit more round than the American M1. The M1's more kind of egg-shaped. You could also see that the M80 is much chintzier, lower quality material. The coarseness of the cotton webbing is way more coarse, way more less comfortable. Obviously you can see the paint is, they painted the helmet after they put the chin straps on. You can see the paint on the chin straps and the fabric and the material and stuff. The metal itself is just much chintzier. These bales here are kind of bent. They're held in place with like 3 rivets, and they're a really thin gauge of steel, as you could see right here. This really tiny, thin, chintzy wire, probably very prone to breaking, compared to the big American, bale up there, which is gonna last a lot longer. But other than that, they're just the same way. This one's actually based off of the American M1 here. This one would have the later liner, the quick detach liner, where they would have the little pegs and the cups on so you could just lift up on the suspension, remove the whole suspension, and drop in a new one if it wore out, which I'm sure would happen very quickly. Whereas this version, the Vietnam version, you'd have to pop rivets and stuff like that in order to replace the liner. So it's actually based off of the post-Vietnam style of liner here that you would find in the 80s in America. So this one is anyways. The early M80s would be direct riveted. I'm not sure on the liner on the M90s. That'd be something you'll have to ask Mike B about, or check out his video. He has an Iraqi M90. I do not. But it would adjust the same way, same exact thing. Very sharp little thin metal buckles are used to adjust everything. Even the chin strap up here, you can see this very thin, kind of sharp metal buckle that you could cut yourself on relatively easily, and everything. With just the right amount of wear on that buckle, it would probably snag you pretty quickly. These helmets do not want to sit up as they are kind of round, so bear with me here. It's an overall, comfortable design and everything like that. So now, unlike the M80s and the M90s, the dye quality on the M80 with this teal, as you would sweat into it, the dye would kind of leach into your skin if the helmet was new, and turn your skin blue for a little bit, which probably isn't the greatest. I don't know how that would affect you really health-wise, but I assume not too bad, but it does make you look kind of weird. If you're wearing this helmet, sweating in it in the desert heat for a long time, it will leach dye into your skin. So that's another interesting thing about the M80, because even though it is like one of the nicest versions of the helmet, and the last version, it's still kind of bad in that regard. Iraq basically being a third world country at that point, it's not that great of a helmet design overall. If you've seen my past video on it, I really can't find a good point about this helmet other than they're cheap and they work well in the desert as long as you're not fighting anybody. That's about it. They're cool and they're collectible, and they have a lot of neat history behind them because of the conflicts they were involved in and how they came to be and whatnot. But as far as a practical design goes, it's not really a good design. So hopefully you can see the similarities and some of the differences here as far as quality goes, and everything like that. We're going to now flip the camera back around and take a look at the helmet, the M80 with its net and camouflage cover on and stuff like that. And I'm going to do kind of a spin around and show you how it looks from all the different profiles, how it would feel going prone and whatnot like that. And then we will conclude the video. Alrighty, so here we have it now all put together exactly the way I got it with its cover on. I don't see these black kind of elastic bands on everyone, but this is how I got it. I got it with this black elastic band. I did put a sand-colored rubber rim protector on it, just so you know. Because I'm just going to put it away after this video. But they wouldn't come with that rubber rim. Only the M90 would have a big surgical tubing rim. But I just put this on there. Once again, I said to keep it from when it bumps into the steel helmets, especially the raw-edged ones and everything like that. If I'm moving them around, I don't want it to chip the edge of this helmet. So that's all. It's just something that I put on there to make sure this stays in good shape. But we'll put it on now and show you how it looks being worn. This is the salad camo helmet cover that it would come with, which is actually a really good, to Iraq's credit, a really good helmet cover. It's quite effective. It is, I probably forgot to show you, it's stitched together like that. It has this big elastic rim, and it is like a 1-inch cotton net over like a nylon salad cover, again in that kind of weird tealish green. But it works quite well as far as concealment goes. It's a comfortable helmet cover. It's very easy to put on. It's really effective. I wish more, like, there was aftermarket helmet covers in just like OD green that were just like this. I would put it on all of my helmets. It's a fantastic helmet cover, and it's probably the best feature of this helmet. You can find them on M90s, M80s, and M80-03s because they would be used entirely together throughout the whole service life of the M80 family of helmets with Iraq. It's a neat design. So the helmet, once again, fits like an M1. They are, once again, one size fits all. They are smaller in profile than the American M1, which probably is good. The American M1 is kind of bulbous, but some Americans have bigger heads. The Iraqis tend to be smaller, so it makes sense, especially since the design originated in South Korea, and they are definitely smaller than Americans. So now we'll kind of spin around, show you how the helmet looks being worn from a bunch of different angles and stuff like that, and then I'm going to simulate when I'm facing backwards going prone, so that way you can see how it looks and all that other good stuff. So here's the front profile of it. Here is the right side profile. Here is the rear profile, and as you can see here, it has the little nape thing that comes down. It doesn't come down as far as on the American M1, but if I simulate going prone, the helmet does not bite into my neck. It's because it sits higher on the head than an American M1 does by quite a lot. So it doesn't bite into my head, into my neck or anything like that. But other than that, it's just a lightweight plastic helmet. This thing feels like, you know, a toy. If you ever had one of those plastic like G.I. Joe helmets as a kid, that's kind of what this feels like. It feels like a cheap toy. And that's kind of the general consensus compared to the steel helmets that the Iraqis had and everything like that. But when you're strapped for cash and you need something that's not going to burn your soldiers, I mean, there really wasn't anything better than they can do as far as protecting their soldiers at the time that they got the M80. So this is really the only option they had. So other than sticking with steel, but steel helmets were expensive. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. You subscribe if you like this sort of thing, and all that other good stuff. If you have a version of this helmet, whether it be an M80, an M90, or this version, the M80-03, I'd very much love to hear about it in the comments, how you got it, where it came from, the story behind it, all the other good stuff, because these all seem to have pretty cool stories, because once again, they are all bringbacks. They weren't imported, really. So hopefully you like this video. If you like this sort of thing, please subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, it goes a long ways to supporting the channel, especially if you can't support the channel monetarily. I'm just watching the video completely, liking, commenting, and all that other stuff. That helps me in the algorithms, which means YouTube kind of has to pay me a little more, because they kind of pay me like crap. And it makes me show up in suggested videos of similar types of videos. So with that being said, if you do want to support the channel monetarily, as little as $1 a month, I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description way down near the bottom. You can copy paste that right into your browser as little as $1 a month, and even if you only want to support it for 1 month, or if you can only support it for 1 month, it goes a long ways to really supporting the channel, as far as helping me get new equipment. I did just break my tripod. Yeah, I had a pretty good run though. 2 years on a cheap, less than $20 Chinese tripod. Pretty good. But I do need to get a new tripod probably fairly soon, so the Patreon money will probably go to that. It did help me get a 4K webcam for live streaming and editing software in 2020, which was fantastic, so thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are absolutely fantastic, and as a bonus, you get into the Discord as a Patreon supporter. if that's something that interests you, as I call it, the cult. There's a lot of really friendly people in there, and I've learned a whole lot, and we talk about everything under the sun. Some of it not even history related. So, but thank you all for watching. Hopefully I will see all of you in the next video. Bye-bye now.